Perhaps I'm being ambiguous in my asking of the question. Can you give me a fact pattern where you would agree to do what the Bureau is asking you to do in California? Whether it be nuclear weaponry, whether it be a terrorist plot, can you imagine a fact pattern where you would do what the Bureau is asking?
Where we create a tool that doesn't exist in order to reduce the security and safety of our users.
Yes.
I'm not aware of such a fact.
So there is no balancing to be done. You have already concluded that you're not going to do it.
No, I've said that we will follow the law. If a balance is struck, if there is an order for us to comply with, we will.
There is an order.
That order is being challenged at the moment as we speak. There's an order in New York that says.
I'm glad you mentioned the order in New York. That's a drug case. So you would agree with me the analysis in drug cases is very different from the analysis in national security cases. Even if you didn't agree with that, you would agree that in footnote 41, the magistrate judge in New York invited this conversation about a legislative remedy, which brings me back to Chairman Sensenbrenner's question. Where is your proposed legislative remedy?
So we don't have legislation to propose today, Congressman.
Well, then how will we know whether or not you think it strikes the right balance if you don't tell us what you think?
Congressman, when we get to the point where it's appropriate for us to propose legislation, not just Apple, but the other stakeholders that are engaged in this process, I'm sure there will be legislation.
Well, let the record reflect. I'm asking you for it now. I would like you to tell us what legislative remedy you could agree with.
I don't have an answer for you today. No one's had an answer for you today.
Can you give me one? I don't know whether Apple has lobbyists. I suspect you may have a government relations department, possibly. Can you submit legislation to Chairman Sensenbrenner's question that you could wholeheartedly support and lobby for that resolves this conundrum between you and the Bureau?
It is my firm belief that such legislation can be drafted. I do not have language for you today.
Well, Mr. Sewell, we draft it, and then your army of government relations folks opposes it. So I'm just trying to save us time. The judge in New York talked about a lengthy conversation. Sometimes circumstances are exigent where we don't have time for a lengthy conversation. So why don't we just save the lobbying and the opposing of whatever Cedric Richmond or Hakeem or Louisa and I come up with? Why don't you propose it? Tell us what you could agree to.
Congressman, we're willing to, and we've offered to engage in that process.
What, the legislative process or the debate process?
Both, of course.
Will you submit legislation to us that you could live with and agree with?
If after we have the debate to determine what the right balance is, then I think that's a natural outcome.
Well, how long is the debate going to last?
I can't anticipate that, Congressman.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned the First Amendment, which I found interesting. Are you familiar with voice exemplars?
I'm sorry, is that a case, Congressman?
No. Voice exemplars are ordered by courts and judges for witnesses or defendants to actually have to speak. So a witness can see whether or not that was the voice that they heard during a robbery, for instance. How about, because you mentioned you have a First Amendment right to not speak. What about those who have been immunized and still refuse to cooperate with a grand jury, and they are held in contempt and in prison? So there are lines of cases where you can't be forced to speak.
Congressman, we've made an argument, a constitutional argument. If the courts determine that that argument is infirm...
I'm just asking you whether or not you agree that there are exceptions.
You've given me two examples that I've not heard of before.
All right. How about back to the Fifth Amendment, because I'm out of time. Real quickly, the Fifth Amendment, you say you're being conscripted to do something. But there's also a line of cases where folks are conscripted to perform surgical procedures or cavity searches or other things I won't go into in mixed company, where they are looking for contraband. So that's a nurse or a doctor or an anesthesiologist that is conscripted by the government. You would agree?
I'm not familiar with these cases.
All right, here's what I'll do. I'm out of time. I'll get you the cases I'm relying on if you'll help me with a legislative remedy. Deal?
I look forward to the case.